The green-skinned woman had been standing in the shadow of the woolshed for nearly a quarter of an hour, watching his hands move, and Ryder Xandros did not acknowledge her because he knew the moment he did, she would stop watching and start explaining why she had been watching, and he preferred the quiet. His fingers worked the strands of horsehair into a tight, even plait, the pattern so familiar his hands knew it without thought. The afternoon sun slanted through the open side of the shed, catching dust motes and the pale cream of fresh shorn wool stacked in burlap against the far wall. 17 bales so far this week, and the season not yet half through. His back ached from yesterday's shearing, his forearms burned from holding the clippers steady, but plaiting was rest work, the kind that let his mind drift while his hands stayed busy. The orc woman shifted her weight, and he heard the scrape of her boot against the hard-pack earth. She was small for her kind, barely taller than his shoulder, with her black hair tied back in a simple tail, and her work clothes dusty from the sorting shed. Clara Korran, the foreman had called her when he brought her around 3 weeks back. She had been sorting wool since then, grading fleeces by hand, pulling out the stained and the coarse, bundling the good stuff for market. She was fast and she did not complain, and she kept to herself, which made her better company than half the men Ryder had worked with over the years. "How do you make it so even?" she asked finally, her voice low and careful, the accent of the southern clans shaping the vowels. Ryder tied off the end of the rope and looked up. "Practice. How much practice?" "All of it." He reached for another hank of hair, began separating it into sections. "My mother taught me when I was 8. My sister was better at it." Clara stepped closer, crouching down beside him with her forearms resting on her knees. Up close, he could see the small tusks that jutted from her lower jaw, the slight point to her ears, the scatter of freckles across her nose that reminded him, absurdly, of his sister. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they followed his hands with an intensity that made him self-conscious. "Why does a rancher need to know braiding?" she asked. "Because rope costs money and horsehair is free." He worked the strands over and under, the rhythm as steady as breathing. "And because my mother said a man who cannot make what he needs is a man who will always be needing." Clara smiled, a quick flash of expression that softened the angular planes of her face. "Your mother sounds like my grandmother. Is she still alive?" "Yes. She is the one who arranged my marriage." Ryder's hands paused for just a moment, then resumed their work. "I did not know you were married." "I am not. I am betrothed. I have met him twice, once when I was 16, once last spring. His name is Dorak, and he breeds goats, and his mother is a clan elder." She said it flatly, without emotion, as if she were reciting the contents of a supply list. "The bride price was paid 2 years ago. I will marry him after the wool season ends. You want to?" "One has nothing to do with it." Clara reached out, hesitated, then touched the edge of the braid he was working. "The bride price was 20 goats and a silver chain. My grandmother accepted it. I was told I agreed, and now it is done." "Except it is not done, or you would be there and not here." She pulled her hand back. "The foreman hired me for the season. Dorak's mother permitted it because the wages go toward my household. It is allowed." Ryder tied off the rope and set it aside. "Allowed does not mean wanted." "No," Clara said softly, "it does not." They did not speak of it again for several weeks. The work consumed the days, the long hours of shearing and sorting and baling, the endless weight of wool and the smell of lanolin and sheep musk that soaked into clothes and skin and hair. Ryder worked the shearing stand, guiding the clippers in smooth strokes while the sheep kicked and bleated, and Clara worked the sorting table, her hands moving with quick efficiency as she graded each fleece. In the evenings they ate with the other hands in the long cabin that served as bunkhouse and mess. And afterward Ryder would sit outside by the fire pit and repair tack or plait rope, while the others played cards or told stories. Clara usually sat apart, mending her own clothes or simply staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. But one evening in late summer, she came and sat across from him, close enough to the fire that her face was lit gold and orange. "Show me," she said. Ryder looked up from the bridle strap he was mending. "Show you what? How to braid. I want to learn." He studied her for a moment, then set the bridle aside and picked up a scrap of rawhide he had been saving for practice work. He cut it into 3 long strips, knotted them together at one end and held it out to her. Over and under. Outside strand crosses over the middle, then the other outside crosses over the new middle. Keep the tension even. Clara took the rawhide and tried, her fingers clumsy and uncertain. The braid twisted, bunched, fell apart. She muttered something in Orcish that sounded like a curse and started again. Ryder watched, offering corrections when the pattern went wrong, and after a while she managed a few inches of passable work. Her hands were strong, the fingers blunt and practical, and when she concentrated her tongue pressed against the edge of one tusk in a way that made her look absurdly young. "It is harder than it looks," she said. "Everything is." She worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant murmur of voices from the bunkhouse. Then she said, without looking up, "Human women braid their hair for their weddings, yes, some do." "How?" Ryder hesitated. "Depends on where they are from." "My mother's people did a crown braid, all the way around the head with flowers worked into it. My sister wore hers in a long plait down her back, wrapped with ribbon." "Your sister is married." She was. "Her husband died of fever 4 years ago. She went west to live with his family." "I have not seen her since." Clara's hand stilled on the rawhide. "I am sorry, so am I." He reached for the bridle again, needing something to do with his hands. "Why are you asking about wedding braids?" "I do not know. Curiosity, I suppose. Orc women do not braid their hair. We wear it loose or tied back, but not braided. It is not our way." "What is your way?" "The groom brings a gift. The bride accepts it. The clan witnesses. Then it is done." She set the rawhide aside, the braid only half finished. "There is no ceremony, no feast, no flowers. Just the agreement and the witness. That sounds lonely." "It is practical." But her voice was tight and she did not meet his eyes. The summer wore on, the heat pressing down like a hand, and the work grew harder. The sheep were restless in the heat. The wool came off thick with dust and burrs, and tempers frayed. One of the shearers quit after a fight over a card game, and the foreman hired a drifter to replace him. A man with cold eyes and a scar across his mouth who watched Clara with an expression Ryder did not like. On the 3rd day the drifter cornered Clara by the sorting shed, his voice too low to hear but his body language unmistakable. Ryder set down his clippers, crossed the yard in 6 strides, and put himself between them. "She is working," he said. The drifter looked him up and down, his mouth curling. "I was just talking to her. Now you are done talking." They stared at each other for a long moment, and then the drifter spat into the dust and walked away. Clara let out a breath, her shoulders dropping. "Thank you," she said. "You should tell the foreman." "And say what?" "That a man spoke to me. That is not a crime." "It is when he speaks like that." Clara shook her head. "I am used to it. Humans do not trust orcs. Some of them do not even think we are people." "That is not an excuse." "No, but it is the world." She touched his arm briefly, a gesture of gratitude, then went back to her sorting. The drifter left at the end of the week, fired for reasons the foreman did not explain, and the work settled back into its rhythm. Ryder found himself watching Clara more often, noticing the way she moved, the quick precision of her hands, the rare, fleeting smiles she gave when she thought no one was looking. He told himself it was only concern, the same he would feel for any of the hands, but he knew he was lying. In early autumn, when the nights grew cool and the fire burned later, Clara came to him again. The others had gone to bed, and he sat alone by the coals, working a piece of leather into a sheath for his knife. She sat down across from him as she had before, but this time she did not ask him to teach her anything. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable, and then she said, "I have a favor to ask." "Ask it." She took a breath, and he saw her hands tighten in her lap. "Will you braid my hair?" Ryder set the leather aside slowly. "Why?" "Because I want to know what it feels like, to have my hair done the way a human bride does, just once." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "I know it is a strange thing to ask. I know it means nothing, that it changes nothing. But I want it anyway. I want 1 hour where I can pretend I am someone else, someone who chose." The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Ryder's throat felt tight. "Clara, you can say no. I will not be offended." "I was not going to say no." She looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face, and then something else, something fragile and hopeful. "You will do it?" "Yes. Now, if you want." She nodded, and he saw her hands tremble slightly as she reached up to pull the tie from her hair. It fell loose around her shoulders, thick and black and straight, longer than he had realized, reaching halfway down her back. He moved to sit beside her, the fire at his back, and gathered a section of her hair in his hands. It was coarser than human hair, but not unpleasantly so, and it smelled faintly of lanolin and wood smoke. "Tell me if I pull," he said. "I will." He began at the crown of her head, sectioning the hair into 3 parts, working slowly to keep the tension even. His fingers felt clumsy and too large, but he remembered the pattern, the way his mother's hands had moved when she braided his sister's hair on the morning of her wedding. Clara sat very still, her breathing slow and deliberate, and he could feel the warmth of her skin through the hair, the slight tension in her shoulders. "You are good at this," she said after a while, her voice soft. "My sister used to make me practice on her every week. She said if I was going to live alone on a ranch, I needed to know how to make things beautiful, not just functional. She sounds wise. She was stubborn, but yes, wise too." He worked in silence, the braid growing longer under his hands, and he felt the strangeness of the moment settle over him. This was not courtship, not seduction, but something quieter and more dangerous. It was intimacy without permission, a crossing of lines neither of them had agreed to draw. And yet he did not stop, and she did not pull away, and the fire burned low as his hands moved through her hair. When he reached the end, he had nothing to tie it with, and Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a length of rawhide cord. He wrapped it around the base of the braid, knotted it securely, and then he sat back and let his hands fall. Clara reached up and touched the braid, following it from crown to end, and when she looked at him, her eyes were bright. "How does it look?" "Beautiful," he said, and meant it. She smiled, a real smile this time, and for a moment she looked like someone else entirely, someone unburdened, someone free. Then the smile faded, and she was just Clara again, the orc woman who would marry a goat farmer she did not love because her grandmother had accepted 20 goats and a silver chain. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome." She stood, the braid swinging behind her, and he thought she would leave. But instead she looked down at him and said, "I do not want to marry him." Ryder stood as well, his heart kicking against his ribs. "Then do not." "It is not that simple. The bride price was paid. If I refuse, my family loses it, and my grandmother loses face. The only way to dissolve the betrothal is to return the price in kind, 20 goats and a silver chain. Then return it. I do not have 20 goats or a silver chain. I have 3 months of wages and a bedroll and the clothes I am wearing. So earn it." Clara stared at him. "Earn it? Yes, work, save, buy what you need. It might take time, but it is possible. How much time? I do not know. Months, maybe. A year. And you think Dorak and his mother will wait a year while I work to reject him? If they are honorable, they will. Clara laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Honor does not pay for goats. No, but pride does. If you return the bride price publicly in front of the clan, they cannot refuse it without shaming themselves. And if you make it clear you are doing this of your own free will, your grandmother cannot lose face. She accepted the price in good faith. You are returning it in good faith. There is no dishonor in that. Clara shook her head, but he could see the idea taking root in her mind. It would take so long, and I would have to stay here or somewhere like here working. I could not go home. Would you want to? She considered that, then said quietly, no. Then stay. And do what? Sort wool until I am old, or do something else, something that pays better. The foreman is always looking for horse breakers. If you can break horses, you can earn more in a month than you would in 3 sorting wool. I have never broken a horse. I have. I could teach you. She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the fear in her eyes warring with something else. Hope, maybe, or desperation. Why would you help me? Because I am falling in love with you, he thought, but did not say. Instead he said, because you asked me to braid your hair like a bride, and I think you deserve to be a bride on your own terms, not someone else's. Clara's breath caught, and then she turned away, her hand rising to touch the braid again. I need to think. Take your time. She walked back toward the bunkhouse, her silhouette disappearing into the darkness, and Ryder stood by the dying fire and wondered what he had just set in motion. She came to him the next morning before dawn, her face set with determination. I want to learn to break horses. Ryder, who had been saddling his gelding for the day's work, turned to look at her. You are certain? No, but I am going to do it anyway, he smiled. Good, come on. They rode out to the east pasture where the foreman kept the wild stock, rangy half-broke horses caught off the flats and penned for sale. Ryder pointed out a gray mare with a white blaze, 3 years old and skittish but not mean. She is the one you want? Clara asked. She is the one you will start with. Breaking horses is not about strength. It is about patience and trust. You have to convince her that being ridden is better than being wild. How do I do that? Slowly. He taught her the basics that day. How to approach the mare without spooking her. How to read the set of her ears and the tension in her body. Clara was fearless, stepping into the pen without hesitation, and the mare watched her with wary eyes but did not bolt. By midday, Clara had managed to touch the mare's shoulder, and by evening she had a rope halter on her. You have a gift for this, Ryder said as they walked back to the bunkhouse, both of them dusty and tired. Or I am too stupid to be afraid. Fear is not stupidity. But you do not let it stop you. That is rare. Clara glanced at him, and he saw the faint smile tugging at her mouth. You are good at teaching. I have had practice. Your sister again. And the apprentices my father used to hire. He was a horse trader before he died. He used to say teaching someone a skill was like breaking a horse. You had to know when to push and when to let them breathe. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was. I wish you could have met him. They worked together after that, every evening after the day's shearing was done. Ryder taught Clara how to lunge the mare, how to saddle her, how to read the moment when the horse decided to trust. It took 2 weeks before Clara climbed into the saddle for the first time, and the mare bucked once, hard before settling. Clara held on, her knuckles white on the reins, and when the mare finally stopped fighting and walked a calm circle around the pen, Clara let out a whoop of triumph that made Ryder laugh. You did it, he said. We did it. No, you did it. I just told you how. Clara dismounted, her legs shaking, and leaned against the fence rail. How much will the foreman pay for a broken horse? $10 for a good one. 15 if she has a smooth gait. And how much is a goat? $3, maybe 4. Clara did the math in her head, her lips moving. $60 for 20 goats. Plus the chain. How much for a silver chain? Depends on the weight. $20, maybe 30, so $90, and I have 12 from my wages. She looked at him. That is 7 more horses, or 5 horses and a season of other work. How long? 4 months if we work fast. 6 if we are careful. Clara nodded slowly. I can do that. I know you can. She turned to look at him fully, and there was something in her expression he had not seen before. Not hope exactly, but certainty. Will you help me? Yes. Why? He met her eyes. Because I want to. She held his gaze for a moment longer, and he thought she might ask him to explain, to put words to the thing that was growing between them. But instead she just nodded and said, Then let us start. They worked through the autumn, breaking horses and saving every dollar. The foreman was skeptical at first, but when he saw the quality of Clara's work, he gave her a contract for 6 more horses, $3 up front, and the balance on delivery. Ryder took on extra work as well, hiring himself out to neighboring ranches for fence repair and well digging, anything that paid. They ate sparingly, saved ruthlessly, and every week Clara counted the money and wrote the total in a ledger she kept under her bunk. In late October, the foreman mentioned a wild horse gather happening on the northern flats, a 3-day roundup where ranchers caught and claimed unbranded stock. The pay was $2 a day plus a share of any horses caught. Clara and Ryder signed on immediately. The gather was hard, dangerous work, riding fast over broken ground to haze the wild herds into temporary pens. Ryder had done it before and knew the risks, but Clara threw herself into it with reckless energy, riding low over her horse's neck as the herd thundered ahead. On the second day, her horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole and went down, and Ryder's heart stopped until he saw her roll clear and get to her feet, dusty but unharmed. You have to be more careful, he said when he reached her, his voice sharper than he meant it to be. Clara looked at him, her eyes bright with adrenaline. I am fine. This time. Next time you might not be. Then I will be careful next time. Clara, I know what I am doing, Ryder. She caught her horse, which had stopped a few yards away, and swung back into the saddle. I am not fragile. I know that, but he stopped, the words catching in his throat. You what? I do not want you to get hurt. Something shifted in her expression. Because you need me to break horses or because you care? Both. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she leaned over and touched his hand where it rested on his saddle horn. I will be careful. I promise. By the end of the gather, they had earned $12 and a share in 15 horses. Clara chose 2 for herself, a bay gelding and a roan mare, both young and sound. Ryder helped her trailer them back to the ranch, and they spent the next 2 weeks breaking them together. The work was easier now, the rhythm familiar, and sometimes Ryder would look up and find Clara watching him with an expression he did not quite know how to read. In mid-November, they took the finished horses to market, a 2-day trip to a town called Ridgefield where traders and ranchers gathered once a month to buy and sell stock. Clara sold 4 horses for $53, and she clutched the money in her hand like it was made of light. That is 65 total, she said, counting it again to be sure. I need 25 more. You will get it. I know, but it feels real now, like it might actually happen. They stayed that night at a boarding house in town, Clara in the women's dormitory and Ryder in the men's, and in the morning they walked together to the market square. Clara bought a length of silver chain from a jeweler, weighing it carefully and counting out $22. The chain was simple, unadorned, but it gleamed in the sunlight, and she wrapped it carefully in a scrap of cloth and tucked it into her saddlebag. One thing down, she said. One thing down, Ryder agreed. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the winter wind cold against their faces, and Ryder thought about the spring. About what would happen when Clara returned to her clan, when she stood in front of Dorak and his mother and gave back the bride price. About what would happen after. He did not let himself imagine beyond that. The first snow came in early December, light and dry, dusting the ground and melting by midday. The shearing season was over, and most of the hands had moved on to other work, but Ryder and Clara stayed. The foreman had winter work for them, mending fences and moving stock to lower pastures, and the pay was steady if not generous. Clara worked with a focus that bordered on obsession, taking every job offered, and by Christmas, she had $82. On Christmas Eve, the foreman roasted a pig and opened a barrel of cider, and the few remaining hands gathered in the bunkhouse to eat and drink and tell stories. Ryder sat near the fire, watching Clara laugh at something one of the older hands said, and he felt a fierce, protective tenderness that surprised him with its intensity. After the meal, Clara found him outside, where he had gone to escape the noise and the smoke. She handed him a tin cup of cider and sat down beside him on the bench. "You disappeared," she said. "I needed air, or you needed quiet. That too." She sipped her cider, her breath misting in the cold. "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About what happens after I return the bride price, where I will go, what I will do." Ryder's chest tightened. "Have you decided?" "No, not yet, but I wanted you to know I am thinking about it. You could stay here. The foreman does not keep hands year-round. There are other ranches." "Yes, or I could go west or south or anywhere." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "What do you want me to do?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. Ryder set his cup down and said, "I want you to do whatever makes you happy." "That is not an answer." "Yes, it is." "No, it is a deflection." She set her own cup aside. "I am asking you what you want, Ryder. I am asking you to be honest with me." He met her eyes, and the words came before he could stop them. "I want you to stay. I want you to stay here with me, and I want to wake up every morning knowing you are not going to disappear. I want to teach you to break horses and to braid your hair and to—" He stopped, shaking his head. "But I have no right to ask that of you. You have spent your whole life being told what to do, and I will not be another man who tells you where to belong." Clara's expression softened. "What if I want you to ask?" "Then I am asking. Stay, please." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm despite the cold. "I will. But only after I return the bride price. I need to do that first. I need to finish it. I know. And then I will come back if you still want me." "I will still want you." She smiled, and he saw the relief in her eyes. "Good." They sat together in the cold, their hands linked, and Ryder felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty exactly, but something close. A sense that the future, which had always seemed distant and uncertain, was beginning to take shape. In January, Clara broke her last 2 horses and sold them at market for $28. She came back with $110 total, and she bought 20 goats from a herder on the edge of town, paying $4 each. The goats were healthy and young, good breeding stock, and she penned them at the ranch until she was ready to leave. "When will you go?" Ryder asked. "In a week. The clan moot is in 10 days. I need to be there." "Do you want me to come with you?" Clara hesitated. "Yes. But I do not know if it is wise." "Why not?" "Because Dorak's mother is powerful, and if she sees a human man with me, she will make assumptions. She will say I am shaming Dorak, that I am rejecting him for you. It will make everything harder. And if she says that anyway, then I will deal with it, but I would rather not give her the ammunition." Ryder nodded, though the thought of letting her go alone made his stomach twist. "Then I will wait here. Thank you." She left on a cold, clear morning, driving the goats ahead of her on foot, the silver chain wrapped and tucked in her pack. Ryder watched her go, standing at the gate until she was out of sight, and then he went back to work and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. She was gone for 12 days. On the 12th day, Ryder was mending a section of fence on the northern boundary when he saw the smoke. It rose in a thick black column from the direction of the ranch, and he dropped his tools and ran, his heart pounding in his throat. The woolshed was on fire. The flames had already consumed half the structure, the dry wood and stored wool burning fast and hot. The foreman and the 2 remaining hands were throwing water from the well, but it was not enough. Ryder grabbed a bucket and joined them, his lungs burning from the smoke, and they worked until the well ran dry and there was nothing left to do but watch it burn. When the fire finally died, it left a blackened skeleton. The beams collapsed and the wool reduced to ash. The foreman stood in the wreckage, his face grim, and Ryder knew without asking what had happened. "Arson," the foreman said. "How do you know?" "Because it started in 3 places at once. Someone set this." Ryder's blood ran cold. "Who? I do not know, but I am going to find out." It took 2 days. A neighbor had seen 2 orc men leaving the ranch the night of the fire, and one of them had been wearing a red sash that marked him as a clan retainer. The foreman sent word to the local marshal, who sent word to the clan council, and within a week the men were identified and arrested. They confessed. They had been sent by Dorak's mother to destroy the ranch's livelihood, to punish Ryder for helping Clara. The council, to everyone's surprise, ruled against her. Arson was a crime under clan law as well as human law, and the council ordered her to pay restitution to the ranch, $300 in silver. The foreman received the payment with grim satisfaction. "I did not think they would rule against one of their own. Maybe they are more honorable than we thought," Ryder said. "Or maybe they were tired of her throwing her weight around. Either way, we can rebuild." Clara returned the next day, walking into the ranch yard with her pack on her back and exhaustion written into every line of her body. Ryder met her at the gate, and she stopped when she saw the burned woolshed, her face going pale. "What happened?" she asked. "Dorak's mother sent men to burn it." "They were caught. The council made her pay." Clara closed her eyes. "I am so sorry. This is my fault." "No, it is her fault. She chose to do this. But she did it because of me. Because I," Ryder stepped forward and took her hands. "Clara, stop. You did nothing wrong. You returned the bride price. You followed the law. What she did was her choice, not yours. But the woolshed can be rebuilt, and it will be with the restitution money. This is over." Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Is it?" "Yes. You are free. The betrothal is dissolved, the price is returned, and Dorak's mother has been held accountable. It is done." She let out a shaky breath, and then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, and felt the tension drain out of her body. "I was so afraid," she said, her voice muffled. "I was afraid she would find a way to stop me, that the council would refuse, that Dorak would challenge it, but it worked. I stood in front of the whole clan and gave back the goats and the chain, and Dorak took them without a word. His mother tried to speak against me, but the council silenced her. They said I had acted honorably and the matter was closed. Then it is closed." "Yes." She pulled back to look at him. "And now I am here, and I am yours if you still want me." "I still want you." She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Good, because I have nowhere else to go. You have here, you will always have here." They stood together in the yard, the wind cold and the sky bright, and Ryder thought about the year that had passed. About the braided hair and the broken horses, the wild gathers and the long nights by the fire. About the way Clara had fought for her freedom, not with violence or rebellion, but with patience and work and quiet determination. "We should tell the foreman you are staying," he said. "I already did. I asked him for a job on my way in. He said yes. Of course he did. You are the best horse breaker he has. I learned from the best teacher." Ryder smiled. Flatterer, truth-teller. They walked back to the bunkhouse together, and that night they sat by the fire as they had so many times before. But this time Clara sat beside him instead of across from him, and when he reached for her hand she took it and held on. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we work. We save. We build something. What kind of something, I do not know yet, but we will figure it out." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I like the sound of that. So do I." Winter passed into spring, and the ranch began to rebuild. The woolshed went up slowly, board by board, and Clara and Ryder worked alongside the crew, hammering and sawing and hauling. The foreman hired more hands as the season approached, and by the time the first sheep arrived for shearing, the shed was finished, larger and sturdier than before. Clara and Ryder courted quietly, in the spaces between work. They rode together in the evenings, teaching each other the things they knew, and sometimes they would sit by the fire and talk until the stars wheeled overhead. Ryder taught Clara to plait rope and mend leather, and Clara taught Ryder the Southern clan songs, her voice low and clear in the darkness. In the summer, the foreman offered Ryder a partnership, a stake in the ranch in exchange for his work and his expertise. Ryder accepted, and with the partnership came a small cabin on the eastern boundary, a two-room structure with a stone fireplace and a view of the mountains. He moved his things into it slowly, building furniture and mending the roof, and one evening he asked Clara to come see it. She walked through the cabin, running her hands over the walls and the rough plain table, and when she turned to look at him her eyes were bright. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is home, or it will be, for you, for us, if you want it." Clara crossed the room and took his hands. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am. I know it is too soon, and I know we have only been courting a few months, but I do not want to wait. I want to wake up next to you and build a life with you," and he stopped, his throat tight. "I want to braid your hair every morning and every night for the rest of my life." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she laughed, a sound that was half sob, half joy. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and held her, and for a moment the world was perfect. They married in midwinter, on the shortest day of the year, in the newly rebuilt woolshed. The foreman cleared the space and swept the floors, and the ranch hands hauled in benches and built a makeshift altar from stacked crates. Clara's family came, her grandmother and her cousins and her younger brother, and they stood on one side of the shed while the ranch hands stood on the other. It was not a large gathering, but it was theirs. Clara wore a simple dress, dyed green to match her skin, and Ryder wore his cleanest shirt and a vest his sister had sent him from the West. The foreman officiated, reading from a well-worn book of common prayers, and when he asked Ryder if he took Clara as his wife, Ryder said yes without hesitation. When he asked Clara if she took Ryder as her husband, she looked at Ryder and smiled and said, "I do." They exchanged rings, simple silver bands that Ryder had bought with the last of his savings, and then the foreman pronounced them married, and the shed erupted in cheers. Afterward there was food and music, and Clara's brother played a fiddle while the ranch hands danced and the firelight flickered. Ryder and Clara stood together near the door, watching, and then Clara turned to him and said, "Will you braid my hair?" "Now." "Yes. Now. I want to wear it the way you did it that first time, the way a bride should." Ryder smiled. "Sit down." She sat, and he stood behind her, gathering her hair in his hands. It was longer now, falling past her shoulders, and he worked slowly, carefully, plaiting it the way he had that night by the fire. Around them, the music played and the voices rose and fell, but he focused only on the feel of her hair, the warmth of her skin, the quiet intimacy of the moment. When he finished, he tied it off with a ribbon white silk that Clara's grandmother had given her, and then he leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "You are beautiful," he said. Clara reached up and touched his hand. "And you are mine." "Yes, I am." They danced later, awkwardly because neither of them was particularly good at it, and they ate and drank and laughed with their friends and family. And when the night grew late and the fire burned low, they walked together to the cabin on the eastern boundary, their breath misting in the cold, and they stepped inside and closed the door behind them. The cabin was warm, the fire already lit, and Clara turned to him and reached up to touch his face. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For seeing me, for helping me, for loving me." Ryder covered her hand with his. "I would do it again, 1,000 times. I know. That is why I love you." They stood together in the firelight, and Ryder thought about the year that had passed, about the orc girl who had sat by the fire and asked him to braid her hair like a bride, about the way she had fought for her freedom and the way he had helped her, not because he expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. And now she was his wife, and he was her husband, and the future stretched out ahead of them, uncertain but full of promise. They made love that night, slowly and carefully, learning each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts. And afterward they lay together in the darkness, Clara's head on Ryder's chest, and they talked about the life they would build, about the horses they would break and the land they would work and the children they might have someday. "What would you name a daughter?" Clara asked. "I do not know. What would you name one? Something strong, something that means she is her own person. I like that." "And a son?" "Something simple, something he can grow into," Clara smiled. "You have thought about this?" "A little. So have I." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and when Ryder woke in the morning, Clara was still there, her hair loose on the pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. He lay still, watching her, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This, he thought, was what home felt like. Spring came, and with it the lambing season and the first round of shearing. Clara and Ryder worked together, managing the ranch's growing herd of horses, and by summer they had saved enough to buy a small parcel of land adjacent to the ranch. They built a barn there and a corral, and by autumn they had a dozen horses of their own, broken, trained, and ready for sale. In late autumn, Clara told Ryder she was pregnant. He stared at her, the words not quite registering, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she laughed and pushed him away. "You are going to crush me," she said. "I am sorry. I cannot believe it. Believe it. I am going to get very large and very uncomfortable, and you are going to have to do all the heavy work. I do not care. I do not care about any of that." He cupped her face in his hands. "I am so happy. So am I." The baby came in the spring, a daughter with green skin and dark hair and a cry that could wake the dead. They named her Alina, and she was perfect. Ryder held her in the firelight, marveling at her tiny fingers and the small tusks just beginning to show, and he felt a love so fierce it stole his breath. Clara watched him from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "You are good at that." "At what?" "At being a father." "I have only been one for an hour, and you are already good at it." He looked at her and then at the baby, and he knew she was right. This was what he had been made for, not just ranching or breaking horses, but this: family, home, love. They raised Alina in the cabin, teaching her to ride and to work and to be kind. When she was 2, Clara became pregnant again, and their second daughter, Vera, was born in the winter. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and she kept them up at night with her refusal to sleep. The years passed and the ranch grew. Ryder and Clara expanded their herd, bought more land, hired hands of their own. Clara's family visited often, her grandmother doting on the girls, and Ryder's sister came west with her new husband and stayed for a month, teaching Alina to braid her own hair. When Alina was 8 and Vera was 6, Clara became pregnant a third time. This daughter, Lily, was quieter than her sisters, more thoughtful, and she spent her days following Ryder around the ranch, asking questions about everything. "Why do horses need shoes?" she asked one day. "To protect their hooves," Ryder said. "Why do hooves need protecting?" "Because they wear down on hard ground." "Why does hard ground wear them down?" Ryder laughed. "Because that is how the world works, little one." Lily considered this, then nodded, satisfied. "Okay." Clara watched from the fence, her arms resting on the top rail, and when Ryder caught her eye, she smiled. "She is just like you." "Is that a good thing?" "It is the best thing." The years continued to pass, each one blending into the next in a haze of work and laughter and quiet contentment. Alina grew into a skilled rider, Vera became a talented weaver, and Lily developed a gift for training dogs. They were good girls, strong and kind, and Ryder was proud of them in a way that sometimes made his chest ache. On a cold evening in late autumn, when Alina was 16 and already taller than her mother, Ryder and Clara sat by the fire in the cabin. The girls were asleep, the ranch was quiet, and the stars were bright outside the window. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Clara asked. "When I asked you to braid my hair all the time. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had said no?" "No, because I could not have said no, not to you." Clara leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I am glad you said yes. I am glad for all of it. The work, the waiting, the fire, all of it. Because it brought me here, to you, to this life. I am glad too." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Will you braid my hair?" Ryder smiled. "Now?" "Yes, like you did on our wedding day. I want to remember." He moved behind her, gathering her hair in his hands, and he braided it slowly, carefully, the pattern as familiar as breathing. And when he finished, he tied it off and kissed the back of her neck, and they sat together in the firelight, content. This, Ryder thought, was everything. The ranch, the girls, the woman beside him. The life they had built from nothing but determination and hope. It was not a grand story, not the kind that would be told in songs or written in books. But it was theirs, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.